after he bought my company, I asked him, aren't you worried about like competition? Because the barrier to entry seems really low. It feels like any kid who can write some code and get distribution, it's really easy to get distribution on Facebook nowadays. And, how do you think about being sustainable, having Zynga like actually last in this environment? And his answer, I'll never forget it. He said, no, this is great. I want there to be more of these small startups that are doing all kinds of things, that are competing.
Hello, I'm Ty Morse. This is my conversation with Siqi Chen, the co-founder of Serious Business, Hey Inc., and Runway. I hope you enjoy. First question is, what's the first thing that you remember creating?
First thing I remember making was probably out of Visual Basic. So one of the best things my dad ever did for me is he bought me a copy of Visual Basic 4.0 when I was in the 6th grade. And I remember we had like a 386 computer. And one of the things that I built with that was a version of Minesweeper. It seemed easy. And then there was another game that I made where it's like Lights Off was this game that was like a device in the 90s. You press buttons and the surrounding tiles go lights off and you're trying to turn them all off. And that was a pretty different, easy to make variation on Minesweeper. So that is the first thing I remember making.
When did you first get your first computer? When did you learn to code?
That was when I first learned to code. But we had a computer fairly early on. So my dad was a physicist. So I remember when we were in Atlanta or Athens, Georgia, we had a laptop at home and I would play video games on it. I certainly wasn't coding anything. But when I was in the 6th grade, that first copy of Visual Basic, my dad was like, here you go. And I was hooked. It really was an incredibly formative event in my life to get the first tool to let you make something out of that computer.
Did you ever try to create anything that you would be able to like sell to other people?
I didn't. I think I didn't really start doing that until college, during college. No, but before, I had no idea. I think growing up as an immigrant and through an academic family, I never thought of myself as a business person. I wasn't really well versed in any of that. I was reading Bill Gates bios back in the day. And that was formative, but it never occurred to me that was something that you could do.
Yeah.
That like as a kid, you would be taken seriously. But I think that's really different nowadays, right? Like Thiel fellowships weren't a thing back when I was growing up in the early 90s, but it's so wonderful that it is.
So what was the first thing that you created in college where you can remember actually having someone pay you?
Having someone pay me. I don't think I made anything that someone was like, I had jobs, right? So, NASA paid me for machine vision work and automating the tracking and calibration of their cameras on the Mars rovers. But in terms of like an actual entrepreneurial product, which is what I assume you mean, that didn't happen until I built the first game on Facebook in 2007. And the idea was Facebook is a social network. The mission was to make the world more open and connected and to map the social graph of the world. And I just thought, it would be a more interesting social graph if you can add weights to the edges. And so we built a game called Friends for Sale, where you can basically trade your friends in a market economy. And we sold virtual currency for that. And that was pretty eye-opening, right? People were willing to pay you hundreds and sometimes thousands of dollars for bits that don't really exist. That was mind-blowing to me. And it was mind-blowing at a time to a lot of people because remember, this is 2007, microtransactions and virtual goods weren't a thing. People would ask me regularly, why would people pay real money for your fake money? It makes sense now, it's intuitive, but certainly wasn't at the time.
So I thought I just saw in one of your other interviews that you didn't start this out as a business, or you didn't start out Friends for Sale as like a business. You just started like printing money.
So that was actually a different game. But it was right around the same time. So what happened was in May of '07, I moved to the city for a job at PowerSet. And I quickly got hooked up with the Y Combinator crowd. I actually wasn't in YC, but I knew some YC founders. And we were at a party and they were playing a game of diplomacy, the board game. And I thought, this is really fun. It also took forever, also highly social. So I thought, maybe like I can build something like that on Facebook. And I was looking for a different idea for a game that was also highly social, that was asynchronous, so it could take a long time to play, but also hopefully easier to build for one person than a full-on board game. So that ended up being a version of Werewolf or Mafia, except for Facebook. And the wonderful thing about that is I wasn't smart enough at a time to like even have real-time chat in the game. I don't think like you could actually build real-time chat on Facebook at a time with Facebook Canvas technology. So it ended up being a messaging board, and when you start a game, you refresh the board to see new messages, and people were just refreshing that thing once every 2 seconds. And we had like hundreds of games going on, and advertisers would pay by impression. And so that game was printing thousands of dollars at a time while I was holding down a full-time job at PowerSet. And my eventual co-founder got word of this, and that's how we started Friends for Sale together.
Yeah. What actually was that dynamic? Like, how did you engage your friend, became your co-founder?
Yeah, so I became known as the FB Mills guy, short for FB Millionaire in PowerSet. And we were hanging out. We were friends after we met at work. And we were just talking through ideas for what we could build next. And I told him I had this one idea for a social network, except it's a market economy driven social network. And you could build it on Facebook. And he says, great, yeah, let's build it. So on nights and weekends, we were building that thing for about, I want to say 3 months or so before we launched it.
What was so you said that you had like an analytics dashboard that you designed, created, and then like decided not to pursue?
Yes, I don't know that it was a decision to not pursue. We actively made that decision, but yes, we had a really robust analytics platform. And the reason why we built that platform is because in the Facebook platform days, your ability to increase conversion rate or virality by like 5%, 10% is a difference between a curve that looks like this going down or going exponential, right? When your K factor, your virality factor is greater than 1, you're growing exponentially. If it's less than 1, you're going to be stagnating, right? But the difference could be literally 5%. So a lot of growth was around optimizing every single percentage out of every single step in the flow. And this is something Nikita is very famous for doing, right? Nikita Beer from Gas. And he's basically taken, very similar principles from the social gaming days. I think that's like probably where it first got popularized. Maybe before that, it was like Tickle or Opinions, Naval Ravikant back in the day. But yeah, so we built this analytics platform because at a time, Mixpanel didn't even exist.
Yeah.
Much less Amplitude. There was really nothing. And so we built it, we used it internally. And it was, it has some wonderful ideas in it. You could just like change the code of copy. You can change a copy in the code and it'll automatically pick up the new versions and automatically run A/B tests and tell you what virality was. Now that I think about it, it was a pretty good product.
Like a pretty sophisticated thing.
The right thing to do if I was like back then a much smarter founder would be to pivot and build and sell the shovels, right?
Yeah.
But I wasn't smart. I felt like I was a kid given a lot of money for a product that happened to be working massively. And I wasn't a good business person. And I think, that sense of insecurity of not being like a real business person has definitely stayed with me. I feel like many people experience imposter syndrome, and I feel like that sense of imposter syndrome has never left me. It's still with me to this day. It's driven me to do what I do today.
I'd be kind of curious to stay on that note. And so I know that you have this interesting interaction, like this is skipping forward. You have this interesting thing where you go to the first like meeting at Postmates and you hear about contribution margin and you're like, what the fuck is this? Have you ever had any other experiences where you just like totally felt insecure, didn't know what you were doing or whatever?
That describes my entire life. It wasn't exactly the first meeting at Postmates, but I remember very distinctly, it was like early on. But the idea of not being a real business person, not being like a good founder operator has really been an insecurity I had for a really long time. I like design, I like products, I have a technical background, and I like making things. And so I remember in the first company, for example, hiring like a head of business, Charles Hudson, who now runs a great fund called Precursor. He has a Harvard MBA, and we would be talking about the business and we'd be showing me spreadsheets. And I'm like, okay, what is this? And then we hired a CFO. I think she was part-time, and put together this model of the business. And I didn't know what it was for, and I didn't know how any of it worked. And in retrospect, I think it was probably completely inaccurate. It was probably some generic forecast, but I just thought that is something that you're supposed to have, that someone else is supposed to do. At Zynga, I felt that. And so Zynga bought that first company, and seeing how Pincus operates, he knows how to run a real business. And the things that, the way he thought about operating and the people that he brought on and the aggressiveness by which they operated was all really educational, eye-opening for me. And also made me feel like, okay, I'm kind of faking it right now.
Did you have any like specific moments where you just like really admired or learned something from Mark Pincus?
Oh, totally. So I might have told the story before, but so you can edit this part out. But the thing that I remember the most is one of our first conversations with Pincus after he bought my company. I asked him, aren't you worried about like competition? Because the barrier to entry seems really low. It feels like any kid who can write some code and get distribution, it's really easy to get distribution on Facebook nowadays. And, how do you think about being sustainable, having Zynga like actually last in this environment? And his answer, I'll never forget it. He said, no, this is great. I want there to be more of these small startups that are doing all kinds of things, that are competing, because it's free R&D.
You figure out what works.
That was free R&D. It just like, that was just a mental model that was so alien and so next level. And that was super memorable. And basically the subtext there is, you have all of these ideas and it's great, but what everyone has a superpower as a founder, and Pincus' superpower is execution. So everyone else is free R&D, and he's going to take the free R&D and now execute everyone. And he did. They were really, really good at it. And so that's one thing I'll always remember. And another thing that he said, maybe in a different conversation, is he said, the problem with other people, and I think the thing I do differently to other people, is that everyone else loves to think about all the ways in which things could go wrong. And that's easy to do. I like to think about what happens when things go right. Because when things go right, they could go really right. And if you're prepared for it, you need to be prepared for it so that you can take full advantage of that opportunity. And if you're not prepared for it, you won't be able to. And I thought that's also mind-blowing, because, I think about survival. I think about like, how do we like keep going? And he thinks about, no, like when it does work, how do I make sure this is not a $1 billion company, but a $100 billion company? So yeah, it's been a really influential mentor in many ways to me.
Yeah. What was the process like where you've created this company and you're working on it for 3 years? What was the process of the acquisition?
So right around, I think mid 2009, Facebook made a lot of changes to the platform. Now the platform, you don't really play games on Facebook, right? It's not a thing anymore. At a time, it was huge. But it was clear that they were like making some pretty big changes to distribution, and it wasn't clear that how this is going to play out. And we were profitable, but we weren't growing massively the way Zynga was. And so we decided at a board level, we should like look for a soft landing. And Jeremy Liu was my first investor and a board member. And he taught me something that's like pretty well known nowadays, but this idea that companies are not sold, they are bought. They're bought. And so then we thought, okay, how do we put ourselves in a position where we can get bought? And one of the things we did quite intentionally is we just went on the conference circuit. And the thing that we did really uniquely is we just shared all of our numbers, all of our technology. We just said, like, this is like how we think about distribution. Here's like the viral formula. Here is serious infection. Here are our actual numbers with all of our apps. And at the time, no one did that. This is all like kind of like black magic at the time. And still like, a lot of the people who came up around that time, I think, forgot his name slips me, which is Gabe, who runs Game of War, right? You ever see the the Super Bowl ads?
Yeah.
Right? Like we came up at the same time, and he runs a crypto game company. But he'll tell you like a lot of the stuff that was done is like serious black magic. Everyone was like very, very protective of their secrets. And once I joined Zynga, I realized they had more secrets than anybody. It was really remarkable how much they knew. But yeah, we shared as much as we can, and we actually had multiple acquirers saying, "Oh wow, they know what they're doing. We want to get a piece of this. They understand distribution. They understand this new space of social gaming. So maybe we can buy them." And Zynga was one of them. So that's how we made it happen.
Why'd you decide to go with Zynga over the other options?
They paid more money.
Is that literally it?
Yeah. Honestly, that is a pretty big component of it. Like we wanted to give our investors a good return, and that is a pretty big factor. And they were the leader in the space. That helped a lot. But I think those two were pretty correlated. They were the leader in space, so they could also raise more money than anyone else. So they had like just a huge war chest. And one of the companies we talked to about that acquisition was a company called Big Huge Games. It's like at the time, it was the largest casual games company in the world. They did a lot of hidden object games that is their biggest market is like housewives in the Midwest. It's a very specific demographic. And the CEO used to be, I think, an MD at Goldman Sachs. And I remember during the course of that acquisition, there's like two things that he said I'll remember for quite a while. One is this idea. So when I thought of Goldman Sachs at the time, I was like, this guy is like cutthroat, super greedy, But the motto of Goldman Sachs was to be long-term greedy.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, wow, that's a really interesting way of thinking about the world. I like it. It helps explain some of the things I would naturally do. But I realized that, okay, that was a moment of confidence building, in that part of the reason why I felt insecure as a business person is like I felt like you had to be like really mercenary and super cutthroat to make it. And I realized that no, like actually it is an iterated infinite game, and Goldman Sachs is a firm that has played it better than most, and their strategy is to be long-term greedy. That was an interesting one. The other idea that I countered was this idea of the logic of the deal.
Yeah.
So as we're pursuing this acquisition, one of the things he taught me is this idea is like, what is the logic of the deal? What is the reason why someone buys you? And for Big Huge Games, it was this idea of entering a different platform for distribution they weren't familiar with. And for Zynga, it was quite different. For Zynga, they were really good at just aggressive distribution and execution, but they felt that, and I think they felt correctly, that the biggest opportunity for the business is retention. And their theory at the time was the thing that will retain people the most is social connections, real social. And Friends for Sale happened to be like
right up that alley.
Yeah, the whole entire game relied on you being social. You had to talk to people. You had to, some people visited people's houses. You had to be popular. And that's like what determined your level of success in the game. And they felt that we understood real social better than anyone in this space. And that was the logic for the deal. So understanding why people are buying you is like really valuable. So we were able to emphasize those points.
Mm-hmm. Did you have, like, after the acquisition, I've heard of a lot of founders where they get bought out and then they're not super happy afterwards.
Sure.
Did you have any of those moments?
You know, I did.
Okay.
And I'll tell you a hilarious story about this that I don't think I've told this.
Perfect.
This is great. Hesitate to name any names here, but you can probably Google them immediately. So I joined Zynga and I actually really liked it for quite a while. By quite a while, I mean like for 3 months. I just thought, wow, this is the only space I really knew, right? It's my first company that I am really deep in. And they are so far ahead of everyone else. They know so much. I was just soaking in how much they knew and the culture of the company. It was also a pretty brutal culture, right? Like, we hear about brutal cultures now, but like, I was in executive review meetings and Pincus would straight up make PMs cry, break down in actual tears in a meeting. Now, you don't hear about that happening nowadays, but that was like not unusual at Zynga. People, 70 hours is like, you're kind of phoning it in, right? A week, people like grinded 6 days, 12 hours, like 996 is pretty normal at Zynga. That was like kind of baseline expectations almost. And I also enjoyed that. I enjoyed it because you get just as much out of like difficult circumstances and difficult people as you get out of the comfortable ones. You probably get more out of that, right? So I think that outlook more than anything served me really, really well. This idea that like, yeah, this is a unique, challenging circumstance, and that in and of itself is valuable. So I enjoyed that for about 3 months. And then I was like, well, if I leave, I'll probably leave with like no money, because I have to invest, but also bored. So I kind of just want to do something else. So I decided to hand in my resignation and say, yeah, I want to go do something else. And of course, they just bought the company. Mm-hmm. And for the 3 months I was there, for all appearances, I was really happy, which I was. It wasn't that I was unhappy. I was just kind of like, I want to do something else. I'm kind of bored. And so then they basically said, hey, how would you like to basically run product? We're going to start a new group called the Central Product Manager Group. And at a time, Zynga, the way Zynga works, it has like maybe a dozen or so studios that are relatively independent, run by GM. So that's kind of an interesting thing. The company had around 600, 700 people at the time. And it was kind of like a federation of studios. The GMs were basically CEOs with P&L responsibility over headcount and revenue. And it also had central functions, one of which was Central Product Management, which didn't exist at the time. So I started a group called Central Product Management, working for one of the co-founders who was head of product. And the idea was we would spread knowledge and we would review and set up the product management function and standardize it across all the different studios. I thought, oh, that's a media role. That's cool. I'll try that, right? And so a few interesting stories. The first one is I would constantly get these emails referencing Central Product Management, saying like, oh, Central Product Management will take care of it. Central Product Management will know about this. We should invite Central Product Manager to it. And for 6 months, Central Product Manager was literally me. There was like no team, but it just sounded like it was a team. It was just me. So I constantly had to explain to people, there is no team. It's just me. So level your expectations accordingly. But the other thing that happened is I did that for a while. And then what happened is my boss, the co-founder, stopped showing up to work. Wouldn't return an email, wouldn't be in office, and it's my direct manager. Like, the only other person above him is Mark Pincus. So at that point, I'm actually running product in the company. And the reason why, by the way, he stopped showing up to work is he decided to become a ninja.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. Which
It's a great reason.
I later found out that he is into ninjutsu and decided to he wanted to start a ninjutsu dojo. So anyway, that happened, and I enjoyed it. That was like really, really fun. You know, it was a lot of impact, a lot of responsibility, and it was constant confidence boosting. I was like, oh, okay, I am not that old, and I was trusted with like responsibility.
A huge amount of responsibility, yeah.
Maybe I can do more than I would think.
What was the thinking behind deciding to leave?
So I left 2 years after the acquisition. So we were halfway vested, and this was about 3 months after the IPO.
Yeah.
And I just felt like, well, I could have twice the money that I have now, but twice the money that I have now doesn't make that much of a difference. As a public company, and I want to do something. I want to build something. I think one of the big motivations for me leaving is actually just the space of the company. So like when I started Serious Business, the game company, I didn't think we were building games at all. I admired what Facebook was doing and what Zuck was doing and this idea of a social network. I actually wanted to build a better social network on top of Facebook, but it ended up being a game. And I always like wasn't, I kind of like lucked, I randomly got into games like almost accidentally. I never thought of myself as a games person. I don't think of myself as a games person now. And one of the reasons why I found games like not as interesting to me is that games are content. And there are very, very, very few examples of games that have stood the test of time. World of Warcraft may be the first, right? Like, how many other games can you name from like
RuneScape,
Counter-Strike, Team Fortress? Relatively few. But when you look at like software products like a Dropbox or a Facebook, there's a lot of products that existed then that still exist today, and they have like staying power. And what was rewarding to me is making an impact that was long lasting. Like if you're going to put so much work and effort into making something great, you kind of don't want it to just like die in like a year and a half or 2 years. And I felt that for the most part, games are almost all like that. And I wanted to do something different.
They're very like cash grabby kind of thing.
Definitely very cash grabby. I think, yeah, that was the other thing. I realized that, you know, it was short-term driven, but also cash grabby. And I realized that, yeah, I know how to make more money tomorrow. I literally could just put a paywall and says like, pay me $20 or else you don't get access to your phone. And people will pay it. And so, yeah, it just wasn't super fulfilling for me.
Yeah. What was the thinking behind starting Hey?
So it was a bad one. The thinking for starting Hey is I wanted to have another company. It's not a great reason to start a startup. So yeah, when I look at like what people are doing at Segundo and their young junior founders, I'm like, man, these kids are like way ahead of where I was, you know, in terms of maturity and ambition, you know, at my age. I'm 40 now. I feel like I'm talking like an old person, but literally like I look at what's happening now with like a sense of deep adoration. So yeah, at the time, I left Zynga, and I remember thinking I'm going to chill on a beach in Thailand for a couple of months. And I just remember being bored out of my mind after a week and a half. And so I wanted to do something. And so got back together with my old co-founder, and we were just ideating on things that we could build, which is also a bad idea.
Why do you think that's a bad idea?
I just think like ideating into a startup, it doesn't like, it's unlikely to translate into a mission that you really, really care about and is passionate about, right? Like you have to ideate into a good idea. Inherently, that's opportunistic. And you're also just like coming at it in a vacuum. It's not born out of like, here's a real problem that I had. I just can't stop thinking about. Those are like the best companies. So we ideated for quite a while, and we couldn't agree on an idea that we were both excited about for quite a while. We had an idea for Venmo right when Venmo got started.
What were some of the ideas?
I think the one that got the furthest along was this idea of Venmo, but it would like be really, really good at splitting your bills. So, you know, you're out with your friends and you can just like pay people via credit. You can split the bill, and maybe some meals are like, okay, I'm just going to take care of it. And basically you get a credit for that. And you get this like, you know, accounting of like who owes what, and you can like pay off that credit for next time. So for example, like if someone took care of the check and your roommates, when the rent bill comes, you have a recording, a transaction of how much you owe this person for that meal, and you can discount the rent against that. And so that was the idea. And eventually the idea was, okay, it's Venmo, right? You can send money to friends, but you can also send like fake Venmo credits to friends, and you can consolidate debts like with one click. That didn't get very far. I forgot why, but I think what really worked is we just started hacking and building. And one of the things we got really excited about is this idea that your phone is always with you and has all of these sensors that has context about your life, where you are, who you're with. You have multiple phones, all the photos that you took. And this is 2012, right? This is like all fairly nascent. The photos actually weren't that good back then. And it could be this like journal that gives you perfect memory. And so we hacked together this prototype that organized your photos and geotagged them and clustered them. And this is before iOS 7. So when you look at your Photos app now on your phone, you have moments, right? And these automatic summaries and year, month, and date. Before iOS 7, all you had was a tile view. They were all just squares, and it's continuous. That's all you had. And so at a time, it was like a really transformational and emotionally evocative way of looking at all your photos. So we started with that, and we added location tracking, and the idea was Heyday, this automatic journal that was able to keep track of all the places you go, the people that you see, what you saw automatically without you having to do anything.
Yeah, it almost sounds like Tab. I mean, not totally, but
Tab, yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I'd be kind of curious to hear what you did when you finally figured out this is not right, or I don't want to keep on working on this, and you decided to like sell it.
So the funny thing about that is when we were working on Heyday, when we started a company, what we knew for sure was going to work, this bullet we had in our back pocket, is to remake Friends for Sale for Twitter on mobile.
Okay.
So we thought, okay, like if this thing doesn't work out, we can always do that, and we know it's going to print money. So we worked on that product for 2.5 years or so. So it took it about 1.5 years to launch it, and we did launch it. It was briefly like really successful. We got like 2 million downloads back in 2013. It was featured worldwide as Apple's editor's choice in every app store around the country, around the world. And then we were getting acquisition offers from Chesky and Yahoo. And we didn't take any of them, which was really stupid.
Why didn't you?
So that's another thing I learned. That's a great question. Companies aren't bought and not sold, but also the best time to sell a company is when you least want to sell it. Because when you most want to sell it, you won't be able to sell it. So the reason why I didn't want to sell it is because it was the time in the company where I least wanted to sell it. We just got featured in the App Store. We were getting hundreds of thousands of downloads a day. People were saying like, this is the most wonderful product. And we were grinding away for 1.5 years for this day. There was no chance I was going to sell it. I thought we were going to take over the world. I thought this is going to be the private mobile first version of Facebook. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. But yeah, it was working. It felt like it was working. And I wasn't smart enough to project forward, like, is this going to work for long enough? And will this be sustainable for long enough for it to work at venture scale? And it wasn't.
What happened when things started like breaking or slowing down?
We kind of kept going. There's a next future fallacy that Andrew Chen coined. This idea that the next future will save us. We'll add search, we'll add cloud sync, we'll add publishing, we'll add sharing. And ultimately, what it came down to is two things. One is more obvious. The more obvious one is it's very hard to get distribution that's sustainable for an inherently private product. Like, this is a private journal. You don't really tell your friends about it. So that's one. The other thing that's less obvious is that the value proposition of the product itself was cognitively stressful for people in unobvious ways. So, I think there was an app called TimeHa back in the day. Mm-hmm. And there's really not a whole lot of other products you could think of where it's just like, it's going to give you perfect memory. There's photo storage applications, right? But nothing like at scale that's basically help you remember your life. And I think there's an actual really good reason for this that wasn't obvious to me until many years after using the product that I built. And what Heyday did is not only would it give context and help you remember all the places that you've been, it did a pretty good job of it. It would also remind you of those things, right? So like if you haven't been to Tahoe for a while and the next thing to Tahoe is like, oh, and here's the last time you've been to Tahoe. Or if you're just sitting there, I'll tell you where you were a year ago. And what I realized is that the value proposition was that it makes it more difficult. You won't forget about the most important memories in your life. And the thing that became obvious only in retrospect is that forgetting is a very valuable thing that your brain does. It's a way of defragmenting your brain so that you can have new information come in. And so this idea of like, here is everything that you've ever done, and it's always accessible, and it's always there. It actually was like quite stressful for people. And I think for that reason, it didn't have like the mainstream popularity that we expected. Since then, there's been at least like a dozen other attempts making similar products. None of them have worked. And I think, some have done a better job and worse job, but the core thing of like forgetting is, I think, as a human, it's like a human natural behavior. And if you like try to intercept it, it's not going to be a great thing.
Yeah, our brains are designed to basically forget as much as
our brains are designed to forget,
like as fast as possible.
That's exactly right.
What was it like getting, having that happen, and then what was the acquisition from Postmates like?
Well, so remember that bullet I told you? We fired that bullet.
Oh, awesome.
And it worked out the way we expected, and then it didn't. So we worked on that for 3 months, and we launched Friends for Sale, but for Twitter, on mobile. And it was invite only. We launched on a product hunt, New Year's Eve, I think 2015. And I think we got $500 from product hunt the first day, and then $5,000 the next, and $50,000 the day after that. And by day like 4 or 5, we were trending worldwide on Twitter. It was like, if you search for Stolen Friends, it was like we were in The Guardian, we were in like every major newspaper internationally. Drew Houston messaged me during the 2 weeks it was live. He said, Kim Kardashian's cousin asked me for an invite code for Kim to Stolen. Can you hook it up? I said, sure, here you go. Because these invite codes are so valuable that kids were literally filming YouTube videos of them crying, begging for an invite code. So it was the most viral product I've ever built. And we were getting inbound messages from every VC you can imagine. And then the woman behind Gamergate, Zoe, she wrote a tweet tagging Catherine Clark, who is a U.S. senator, saying this game is offensive and it opens a new avenue of harassment on Twitter, based on being tagged in a tweet saying, like, I stole Zoe Quinn on Twitter. And Catherine Clark wrote an open letter to Jack Dorsey and Tim Cook, asking us to be pulled off of Twitter in the App Store. Now, mind you, nothing bad actually happened ever in the app. And Jack Dorsey was spending hours a day on the app and spent $3,000 on it, and half the Twitter was
invested. Yeah,
he invested through real dollars. But
really.
He was like playing it. He loved it clearly. And Tim Cook never played it. He didn't know what it's about. He just saw this angry letter from senators, like, wrote to the App Store and said, pull it. And then we needed to pursue an acquisition. So we went from, because we were out of money, we were about to raise, right? We're like, this is the last bullet we fired. It was like, great, it's working. We're going to go raise. And it's like, well, we can't even like do anything. People can't download it anymore.
How did that actually feel? How did that like moment when Tim kind of rug pulled you basically? Where it was like, it was working right up until the moment that Apple pulled it from the store, correct?
Correct. It was, yeah. It was surreal. Mm-hmm. It was like obviously really painful, but I also have like, you know, a sadomasochistic part of me, like similar to Zynga, right? Where it's like, well, I mean, this is a unique experience, and I'll get to tell this story, and maybe at the end, like, all you get are good stories, and this is a particularly good one. And so that energized me and motivated me to make the best story I can and do whatever I could to make it work. But yeah, I felt bad. But it was also amazing to see like what people were willing to do in difficult circumstances, like the way the team rallied to do everything we can to make it work. We got to like -1 payroll, you know?
How do you think about surrounding yourself with like really great people?
Yeah, one of the best things I did was to work at PowerSet right after college. It's my first job. The people and hang out with a bunch of YC people. I think it is so motivating over the past like 20 years to see normal people like become enormously successful. And I think that's really unique in San Francisco. The cultural norms that has created that is so unique. So a few observations. So Drew Houston and Howie from Airtable, even Brian Chesky, like before Airbnb is what it is today, the founders of GitHub worked at PowerSet. And in fact, Chris Wanstroth, who was the founder and CEO, he was a contractor for my company, Serious Business, in early 2008. And so he was just an amazing engineer. He built a translation layer between Facebook markup language and MySpace markup language so that our game would just be easily portable to MySpace. And I remember the very day we were hanging out at Lazy Bear in San Francisco in 2008, and I was giving him an employment offer to join our game company. Please. He said, was the same day that DHH put Rails on GitHub.
Oh.
And that was the moment where he decided that GitHub was going to be a real business. And so he decided to, well, you know, he founded it. It was a side project. It was him and Tom, Preston Warner, and both of them were contractors at PowerSet, and that's how I met them, along with Chris Van Pelt. Those are the three people. But yeah, just watching GitHub happen, right? Like they were right there. they were literally in my office, and it became GitHub. And so you have all of like your peers have all like done amazing things since. You're like, okay, that's normal. It's normal to start a unicorn. And the fact that I haven't done that, there's something wrong with me. Hey, that is like how it affects your brain.
Yeah.
Gabe, right? Gabe was just a guy in my YC batch. And he has like multiple Super Bowl ads, right? So that's really interesting. I think surrounding yourself with Gary Tan. Gary Tan was just a guy. Like, he was a friend. I've known him for 15, 20 years, and now he's like Gary Tan.
Yeah.
It's just so surreal. Anish is a partner at Andreessen, Andrew Chen, all these people. So watching your peers become like really successful people, it's not like a sense of envy. It's just like, it's normal.
Yeah.
Right. And so that really calibrates your ambition and what you are capable of. Right. Normally it's like, well, what business do I have in starting a company or building something significant? It's like, no, that's just kind of a thing you do. It's like, that's a job that people do. It's really normal. So it's not a big deal. That really is very useful to have in terms of mentality. And the other thing is how easily and quickly people take you seriously in San Francisco. So the thing I was reflecting back on in my first company, after we raised the seed or Series A, it was the only round we raised for that first company, raised $5 million. And I found myself like being a real CEO of a real venture-backed company. And I was thinking, this is like what I wanted to do since I was in the 6th grade. And this is happening now. And 6 months ago, I moved to the city and literally didn't know a single person, right? And the magic of Silicon Valley, like allowing that to happen even in 07. Right now it's like kind of normal. 07, that was like less normal, but it still was able to happen. Also made me really grateful for the culture that we have here.
What was it like when what was that experience like of first coming to Silicon Valley, and how did you get looped in with the YC folks?
Oh, so 2 things I'll remember. So Luke Nosek from Founders Fund was an investor in PowerSet. And I don't know how or I don't know why, but he was in office one day and we're just talking and just took me under his wing. And, he would have these parties at Gavin Newsom's old house with the underground pool. And I would just be in his limo. And I was literally a step above an intern, knew nobody. And I was like hanging out with like, part of the PayPal mafia in my first like month. I'm like, this is so weird, but no, I'll write it. I don't know why. I haven't talked to Luke for a while. I don't know why. That was interesting, but that is definitely one of the things where like I pulled one over him and a bunch of other people who want to hang out with me for no conceivably good reason. So maybe I should try something. So that's one. The other thing was, so before Twitch, there was Justin TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on Justin TV, watching. I was like on the website.
On the website watching
Justin TV,
okay.
like when he got swatted at the Y scraper.
Oh, why? Okay.
And this is when, like they had the wired up modems, multiple modems, like, and they had to change the battery packs every like 2 hours, right? But there was this one person, we were just talking, and then this person said, hey, I'm like a girl who's into tech, like, does anyone want to chat? So I added her on AIM, we started talking. And then I was at an event, a tech event, when I first moved to San Francisco. And I was hanging out with people I met. And turns out it was the same girl I was chatting with. And she's Jessica Ma, and she started a company called Indinero, and now it's like kind of like guess a business influencer, but she started a company which was like 18, 19, something like that. And she knew a lot of YC people. So I was hanging out with her, and that's how we got plugged in. Basically through a random conversation on Justin.tv when I was in San Diego before I even moved here.
That's wild. I would be super curious to learn what the first like 3 months working at Sandbox. Were you a co-founder of Sandbox?
I was not. I was a small angel investor in the company, and I joined Sandbox in late 2007 after I left for Postmates.
Okay. Yeah. What was that like?
I thought it was really fun, mixed with also horror. But I just felt really fortunate and lucky to be able to work on something so interesting that had such a broad number of domains. So the vision and the idea of making the holodeck or the Matrix real was like, this is it. I love this. This is fantastic. One of the motivations for joining Sandbox 2 was I've worked in basically bits all my life and just thought that as part of the insecurity, actually, now that I think about it, this idea of like, you know, what real business people do?
I know.
They do like real estate transactions, right? They build stores. They like run McDonald's, right? And I thought, well, I get to do that. Maybe I'll learn something there. And I felt like that intersection of skills was going to be valuable for some unknown reason in the future. I have no idea what. I think that curiosity was pretty useful and eventually. So it was a great vision. I felt I was going to learn something interesting. And also I was able to work on hardware as well as operations with like retail and make games and content, and I get to play them all the time. Like, as someone with like ADHD, it's kind of the perfect job. You get to like do everything. So that was really, really fun. That's a fun part. Of course, the horrifying part was, okay, look, this is a serious business here. You know, we have retail stores and it's like a very complicated business. We got to like do a lot with a little. So getting our financial and our operations like very tight is important. So I had experience with modeling now from my Zynga days, and I put together a financial model. And the horrifying thing is, oh, we're going to be out of money in 3 months. And I just moved my entire family to a foreign country. This is not what I was expecting. So mixed feelings.
Mixed feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you like help pull it out of that nosedive?
So it was definitely a team effort. So I wasn't the founder, and at the time I wasn't the CEO either. So Steve was both the founder and CEO. Steve was someone I'd known since college days. I always thought he was like actually a really good business person. And I still think he's like, I mean, you know, what he's did with Sandbox for the past couple of years is just phenomenal. It's unbelievable. He's like one of the best business people actually I know. So the two things that happened when we found out we were going to run out of money is, well, we started fundraising. And I think that is one of my superpowers. I'm pretty good at that. But to make the fundraise successful, we needed to have people actually experience the product and experience. And no one was willing to fly for Hong Kong for this company I've never heard of. And we were running out of money. So Steve basically took all the money he had, was something like $1 million, to keep payroll going and then to fund a store in the Hillsdale Mall in San Mateo in the peninsula here, which is like, 10 minutes away, 50 minutes away from Sand Hill. And so we like got that thing open, and I helped rally a bunch of people that I knew, and quickly that became a viral event. People were posting these videos of them in this green screen room playing, yelling, and it became a status symbol for like whether you're somebody in the Valley. Like, did you get invited to the thing, right? Oh, well, how come you didn't tweet about it? And eventually Andreessen came and played it, and on a Sunday, spent 3 hours with us in the afternoon. We had a partner meeting the next day. They bought an entire partnership that afternoon, and we had a term sheet the next day. Yeah, I think I told that story, but yeah, that was an extremely wild, fun fundraising experience from end to end. Probably like one of the things I've done that I'm most proud of, just in terms of like the results and output. Like, yeah, that shouldn't have happened.
And would it just not have happened if that $1 million check hadn't gone in when it did?
It wouldn't have happened. No,
So
if
like
Steve
basically
didn't fund
company.
it, I don't think it would have happened. Right? No way. Like we needed to have that store. But we also like put together a list of 400 or so investors. Like I thought the chances of us raising were pretty close to zero, because this is 2008, and I knew enough about fundraising to know a few things. One is generally retail businesses aren't like venture backable, with the sole exception of the Melt Sequoia, which they probably regret investing in. Generally, people don't like investing in content like games, right? That's not generally a venture backable category. That's changing in recent years, I think. Generally, people don't like investing in hardware. They like it now, but not in 2008, right? That's very CapEx intensive, and many million, hundreds of millions are burned in doing that. They don't like investing in that. And VR was dead in 2018. Like, it was the VR winter. So meanwhile, I'm raising for a VR company that makes content, that also has a hardware component, that makes all of its money doing retail. So I didn't think we were going to get funded. But I thought, well, I believe in the story. I believe in what we're doing. Let's do whatever we can. So we did a tour of Asia, tried to invite everyone we could to it. No one bit. And we started with the lower tier investors. And we found is that the higher of the tier investors we got, the more they liked the idea.
Yeah.
Which is like one of my big learnings about fundraising, is that like the better investors aren't necessarily like more selective. They are, but just differently. What I mean by that is like, because a lower tier investor doesn't like a thing, doesn't mean that a higher tier investor won't feel the exact opposite. And my theory about this is, I think a less good investor invests in, quote, businesses. They invest on traction and revenue and whether the thing is going to make money. And that's a reasonable way of investing if you're investing in the public markets. If you're investing in venture in an early stage, you are investing in whether it's an N of one company that's going to be one of the largest companies in the world, and those companies are weird and unusual, and you have to believe in them, and it's very contrarian. And those are the companies that the best investors actually look for, which is entirely different from the worst investors, which is why they are the best and some investors are less good. And that was definitely Sandbox. Like, on paper, this is the most insane investment. But in terms of like what it was about, building the holodeck, a holodeck in every neighborhood, if it works, it could be really, really big.
Why did it say like a holodeck in every neighborhood versus something else, like every home, something like that?
Oh, that's a great question. So one of my theses in joining the company is that I believe this is the format of virtual reality that actually is going to work and has real staying power. So I've been I've been really into VR since the beginning, since the very first development kit of an Oculus. And actually, Mark Pincus had a very similar, Mark Andreessen had a really similar thesis. This is why he invested in Oculus. Like, people generally believe in VR. And I wanted to look for something that was going to last for a while and was going to work. And the thing I knew a couple of years into VR is that this headset thing didn't seem like it was going to be the thing. Because when you imagine what VR is supposed to be, you're imagining, what you're imagining is Ready Player One, right? You have this infinite treadmill. You can like go anywhere, do anything. But the actual experience at home is you're seated. You can't walk anywhere. You could play maybe a mech game. Maybe you can like pilot a airplane. But the Ready Player One experience isn't there, and isn't there for a few reasons. The first one is the idea of the infinite treadmill literally violates the laws of physics as depicted in Ready Player One. It's like instantaneous change of direction. Like it requires infinite force and infinite strength of material. Like you can't do it.
This doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one. But the other thing is you have the other thing about VR, the other way to solve that is you can have a large amount of real estate. So basically a large open space for you to freely walk about, right? But even then you don't have like the full body like experience with friends. And so one of my investment thesis in terms of joining a company was that real estate is not going to get cheaper. And the right format for VR, as experienced by Sandbox, is it's full body, it is social, and it's free roam. You can like walk around. And if that's true, like that is not an experience that people will have at home. Most people will have at home. And if they do, it's going to be very few people and it'll only get more expensive. And so there must be these places if people want this form factor outside of the home. So that's why we didn't describe it as like a holodeck at your home, because, you know, it's funny. If you're Mark Andreessen, you can have that. And most people can't. And I remember when we were pitching the partnership, the Series A to Andreessen, Mark Andreessen actually asked, how much for putting one of these in my house? And I said immediately, the retail price is approximately one term sheet. And so we still owe him an installation. I don't think we actually ever did that.
It seems like it'd be easy to do. You just, I don't know, it's probably like $30,000.
Yeah, somewhere around there. It's like 50. I mean, it's like you're on a real-time motion capture stage with like real motion capture cameras. But yeah, so a holodeck in every neighborhood. Yeah. So the idea was this is a ubiquitous thing that will be as ubiquitous as movies. Instead of like movies in which you watch the character, you are the main character. Like that is the future of entertainment.
Yeah. So what happened? I want to like do a play-by-play scene of COVID. What happened from like January of 2020 to like March or April?
Okay, so I was appointed CEO like 3 months before January. And it was because, you know, Steve and the board was looking at RB, and since I was basically the chief fundraiser anyway, we decided, okay, why don't we just like switch roles and you can have the CEO title. In practice, nothing really changed. So that's what we did. And in January, we had this store that's still running on Market Street right under the Equinox near the Four Seasons.
Yep. And
we decided we want to do a B because the core metrics, you know, the margins, all this, it was looking great. We proven a bunch of, we answered a bunch of financial questions about the viability of the business, and now it's like time to grow. So we brought a bunch of investors over, and everyone had a great time, and the round was getting hot, and the vibes were good, and somewhere between early February and early March, it got less hot. Things were shutting down. People were getting scared. And it became very, very clear. I think there was like I think on March 14th was when the stock market crashed during COVID. And that's when everyone panicked. And Andreessen actually put together a process where they were triaging all of their companies for emergency funding. Because in that world, you know, the whole world is apocalyptic event. And no other investor was going to be deploying money into your own company. So you have to like basically figure out how to triage your companies. And I'm guessing we weren't very high on the priority list. Do you want to save like your SaaS company, or do you want to save your retail company whose entire revenue stream is going to go to zero? And also Andreessen was like smarter than most. If you remember in January, they had this like paper sign on their door, and it said, we're not shaking hands anymore. Right? And they got so much shit in the press for it. People called them paranoid, like fear-mongering. And then what happened? It's 3 months later, everyone's like, mask up, right? So in March, people weren't sure how long this was going to last. People thought we could just lock down for a week. Maybe it'll go away. In April, I think, Elon tweeted that this whole thing was going to blow over by June. And Andreessen, when we were going through triage process, they said, no. This is going to be a year to 2 years. And they were spot on. So we had to convince Andreessen why we should get bridge loan for, not a bridge loan, but bridge funding for 2 years of no revenue. That was not an easy thing to convince them of. But basically we said, okay, we can pivot to content for a little bit. We have this thing that works. And it really came down to Anish, who joined the partnership or fairly recently as a fintech partner. And he told, I think Ben or someone told me this many years later, but he said like, they weren't going to fund it. And he stood up and he said, I've known Siqi for like 10 years. And if there's like one person I believe that is going to like help make this work, it's going to be him. We should support the company. And that's what did it. So it's like, and at the time he was a fellow founder, a kid about the same age as me. And so, yeah, it's one of those, another unexpected benefit of having great peers. So yeah, they bridged the company, went through PPP. And what I did is I looked at the model and we decided that no, we need to lay off everyone in the company, including myself. We just need to hibernate it for 2 years. There is nothing for me to do, nothing for anyone else to do. So the company became less than 20 people for 2 years. And the founder and CEO, Steve, hibernated for that long, and now it's 1,000 employees and profitable. It's like the most remarkable turnaround story ever.
How did it go over when you guys, dropped it to only 20 employees?
Well, honestly, I wasn't there anymore. I was still on the board. I mean, so I did actually do the layoffs. That's like one of the last things I did. And I'll tell you, it was hard. Like but it was hard for everyone to lose their jobs. The truth is, it was actually easier for me than almost anyone. And I've laid other people off before. And that was actually the easiest one. The reason why it was easiest is because it was the only time where I was also laying myself off. So I could credibly say, we are all in the same boat here. I am also losing my job. Like, there is nothing in it for me. And so I think it mostly got like good support. I mean, people understood this was an act of God, right? The business is working, we're on a high, and we're obviously can't raise if there's no revenue. And so there was also a really good reason for why we're doing it that was understandable. So all in all, I think it wasn't as bad as some other layoffs I've done before.
Interesting. So one of the things that I really like about you is you're one of the only people that I've ever seen actively make something people love, basically, or build something people love on their Twitter. How do you think about building something or creating something that people love?
It's so deeply personal to me. I love what we're building at Runway for that reason. It's not just like that we're building something people love, but I think the act of building something people love with people that you love and respect is what makes us human in a real sense. So, one of the defining things that makes humans is language. And it allows us to coordinate groups of people to cooperate, right, when we invent a language. But our ability to cooperate with language is limited to what's within earshot, right? So you can coordinate maybe like a few dozen people in a tribe. And so that's why the largest unit of human society is about a tribe, right? But then what changed was the invention of writing. And writing allows you to coordinate people beyond the range of voice. And so writing is what enabled societies to go from tribes to civilizations and nations. And so like much of what defines humans is our ability to cooperate with people to create things, whether that's inventions or technologies or nations. And so what we're doing, like building things that people love, I think is like a very deep part of what makes humans humans. And the other thing I really love about it is, I think I recently talked about how like work-life balance is overrated. And because inherently this like bifurcation implies that work is not part of life. And why not? Like literally everything is life. And part of being humans is work. And that a lot of that work is creating things that people love with the people that you love. And the product that we're building here, one of the things that gives it meaning is like more people get to feel that. More people get to feel the way we feel. Because in order to love what you do and build things that you love, you have to understand why. What is the impact? What is the system that you're working in? And we see Runway as a means of like having more people understand that. So it means a lot. I think like it is it's a real sense of ikigai, the Japanese word for like the sense of living, right? So a few weeks ago in All Hands, one of our engineers said the following, Selasi's, it's from Microsoft. I love the guy to death, but he just said this. He said, on Sundays, I can't wait for it to be Monday. Like, that is what it should feel like. That is what it feels like working at our company. And that's what it should feel like working in general. And you get to feel that when you know that you're building things that people love with people that you love.
What's the most meaningful thing or meaningful activity you do?
I mean, it's a cop-out, but I think it's this. Like, I really, really love what we do. But, outside of that, I really enjoy running with my 9-year-old. I wasn't athletic when I was a kid, and seeing her like being so athletic, and being able to spend time with her for hours at a time. And like, she's 9 years old. She's like doing 6-mile runs on mountains with me. And I'm like, we're doing the same speed. That's also rewarding.
That's awesome. Yeah. Do you have any like people that you really look up to on the design side?
Yeah. I mean, the two obvious people is Kari from Linear. I think what he's saying about quality and intuition, I love how the zeitgeist has turned towards that. I think one of the people who enabled that recently is Brian Chesky from Airbnb, right? This idea of like just turning over the scientific management school of product management. Everything is A/B tested, everything is metrics driven, and bringing back this idea of emotion and intuition and judgment, I think is beautiful. I think it works. It brings back the human element, the emotional element of creation. And I think that's wonderful. And I think Carrie is taking that torch and running with it to the next station here.
Okay. Final question. What's the hardest thing you've overcome?
I don't know that I've overcome this. The hardest thing I'm overcoming is my own ego and insecurity. So much of what people do, what I do, is driven by ego and insecurity. And so being aware of it and overcoming it is just really difficult, because to overcome, you have to see it first, and even seeing it is really difficult. So like, as a real example, one of the things I realized fairly recently is, for example, you're a founder, you feel a lot of anxiety, as one does. And what do you do with that anxiety? You probably externalize it some way, right? You take that anxiety and say, I feel really anxious, and you like yell at the team or, micromanage and do all these other things, and a lot of great founders do that. Elon is one of them, right? I think different things work differently for different founders. The thing I realized about that is understanding why I actually feel that way. And what I realized about the reason why I feel that way is like that I was inherently self-centered. Like, I feel anxiety because an unhappy customer makes me unhappy, and I don't want to feel that unhappiness. Or a bug in the product says something negative about my identity in the world, and I don't want people to think I'm incompetent or whatever. And it's completely about me. And the difficulty there is, well, it's easy to justify as something not about you, right? I'm being a good CEO. I'm being like an aggressive operator. But what was really free meta realization is, okay, I actually do want to be a good CEO. I actually do want to be a good operator. And so if I don't make it about me, what is the thing that's actually going to help the team and the company do better? And it's not always like externalizing anxiety. It is being clear about the priorities and being supportive and pitching in. And those things are things that don't readily come into your focus when you're focused on yourself.
Okay. Well, Siqi, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.